Hello, good evening. It is a Sunday, 11th of October 2020, and a very special day in American history and ethos. Today is the National Coming Out Day in the US, which is a national holiday. And what other way to celebrate the community in India than having a conversation around equity, inclusion, social justice? So I'm here with this special episode and edition of Diversity Dialogue Taboo Tales with two of my very good friends, Celia Sandhya Daniels, who is from the US. She is an exec board member at TransCanWork, and my dear friend Utkarsh Patel, who is an author, a mythologist, and a TEDx speaker. So, welcome once again to this episode of Diversity Dialogue with me, your host, curator Preeti Chaudhary here. Let us pull our dear guests into the stream as well and get the conversation started. Hello, good evening, folks, and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Diversity Dialogue with me, your host, Preeti Chaudhary, my dear friends, Celia and Utkarsh. To get the ball rolling, thank you very much. Namaskar, Vanakkam, and I do not know the word in Marathi, but I will say Namaste in any case. And Kemcho in Gujarati, for Utkarsh. So that is good. So with that, let's get the evening rolling. Um, you know, Again, something which is very close to our heart, this whole equity and inclusion. At least one of us is from the community and two of us are allies, and we try and do our bit in terms of raising the awareness and creating conversations around such important topics in our life. And as Celia, you are from the US, and today is the national coming out holiday in the US, and so I thought an opportune time to get this conversation kick-started with a series or an episode on taboo tales. Now, taboo tales are something which have been, or these conversations or these subjects have been around from ancient times. And the whole idea for having a conversation around this topic with both of you is for Utkarsh to bring in the ancient civilization perspective of inclusion, of equity and diversity from that standpoint. And Celia, with you from the modern context in terms of what is happening globally in this space of again social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and then from both of you to chart out a way forward. So with that, let's get the conversation started. Let me come right over to Utkarsh, who will set the context with us, in terms of taking us back right to the ancient time, maybe 5,000-6,000 years or even beyond, and putting a context to this whole conversation. Over to you, Utkarsh. Thank you.
Right. Good evening and good morning to all of you who've joined us here. And it's indeed a day of celebration. And I must congratulate all the people who have taken this bold step to come out on this particular day, and wish all the best to all who are probably still struggling, but will make it nonetheless. The whole idea of this whole discussion, with me bringing in something that is really, really ancient, as Preeti mentioned, and Celia bringing in, the present context. Why do we go back to the ancient times? We go back to the ancient times because, we are generally told that what's there in the ancient texts is all good, is all fine, is all correct. If that is so, then let's look at this too, because in that case, this too should be absolutely applicable and true. The whole discussion has been sort of centered around two aspects that we're going to talk about. One is what we colloquially call cross-dressing. However, that's a colloquial word as a phrase, as mentioned to all of us. It's actually known as transvestism. Am I correct, Celia? Correct me if I'm wrong. That's transvestism. But since all of us probably understand that, this is probably in a colloquial way, for my part of the discussion, I'll probably refer to it. But I do stand corrected if it's called transvestism. I think we should all start using that term. Let me just take you back to some time wherein I'll be just sharing some pictures with all of us. Preeti, just help me out. Let me know if you're getting to see the images or not. Is it visible? I'm sorry, Preeti. Is it
Not
visible,
yet.
Preeti?
Not yet.
Oh my.
Not a problem. We're
Yeah.
right here. So yeah,
Right. Technology is a bit of
that's
a mess.
okay. That's all right.
Right.
Just give it a nice, yeah. Do it exactly how you did just
Are
10
you able
minutes
to
before.
see it
Pure.
now?
Not yet.
God.
Meantime, maybe I'll let Celia talk a little bit about the explanation of the term transvestism and transvestite. She can bring that to the table. So, Celia, over to you. Can you please unmute yourself? And oh, and we are back.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll come to you, Celia, and then I will go back to the
Yeah, yeah.
what Utkarsh is saying.
No, no,
Over
no
to you,
problem.
Celia.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
fine.
please. Okay, all right. Hang on a minute. Wait. Let me just share your screen and we are right here. There you go.
Right. So, technology and me, we seldom get along well because the times that I talk about, we didn't have this technology. So, I don't take the blame if technology doesn't work whenever I speak. But let's come back to the subject that we spoke about, and that is cross dressing. Now, cross dressing is something that we find in our scriptures, in our texts very beautifully. Cross dressing is not when men just want to dress up as women and vice versa. Unfortunately, what has happened is that in our country, this is a matter of a bit of a ridicule and look down. One, because it's portrayal in films as caricatures or as drags, and we think that people do that more as a disguise. But that's not exactly how to look at it. I have a quote, and I won't name the person, but I have a quote which reads like this, and I quote: for most part, I definitely don't identify as any gender. I'm not a guy. I don't really feel like a woman, but obviously I was born one. So I'm sometimes in the middle, which in my perfect imagination is like having best of both the sexes. I have a lot of characteristics that would normally be present in a guy, and then less that would be present in a woman. But then sometimes I'll put on a skirt. So, what we have to understand here is that people wear these dresses. If men want to wear these dresses, it is probably because they want to express themselves. And once again, I'll borrow this line which Celia had mentioned to me, that if people dress this way, if people want to dress in an alternative manner, it's not a statement of lifestyle, it's a statement of life. It is their life. And we can see ample number of references of that in our scriptures. The picture that you see on screen is of Krishna being dressed as a woman by all the gopis, and he's enjoying it. He's asking for it. He's literally saying that you guys aren't doing a good job of it. And there are stories which goes on and on of about this. And here sometimes Krishna is also referred to as Shyam Sakhi. Shyam Sakhi as in the friend Shyam and Sakhi. And there are many stories about it. And but what is important here is nobody ever looked down upon. Look at the beautiful paintings. Look at the painting here, where on the right hand, on the left hand side, you have Radha, who has dressed up as Krishna, and Krishna has the darker shade that you see. Krishna in red has dressed up as a woman. And there is such a lovely tumri called Tum Radhe Bano Shyam. All those who are really interested in listening to this tumri, which has been made famous by Pandit Ajay Pohankar, Begum Parveen Sultana, and so on and so forth, must go and listen to this tumri. We can't play it here today, but listen to it. It's a beautiful tumri, where there is so much of passion involved in both exchanging their clothes. Look at this, another miniature painting where you see Krishna, who's in the darker shade, has dressed up as Radha, and Radha has dressed up as Krishna. And there are many, many such examples. And till some time back, we used to have this cult which was very prominent in the eastern side, like Bengal, Orissa, and even Uttar Pradesh, who were known as the Sakhi Bekis. These were men who wanted to dress up as women and please their god, that is Krishna here. If you think it's all about Krishna and Radha, then that's not true. We even have a temple in Vrindavan where Lord Shiva, who's known as Gopeshwar here, has dressed up as a woman. And only because he wanted to be a part of the Ras Leela that, Radha and Krishna used to enjoy. And for that, you see, he is dressed up as a woman. So even it's not just about Krishna, it's not just about individual gods. It was a very prevalent thing. And once again, if you think this was just in India, no. I mean, there are references of Greek mythology where Achilles, one of the most handsome and young macho heroes of the Trojan War, has dressed up as a woman. We have Hercules, who's also dressed up as a woman. In the Scandinavian mythology, we have Thor, who has references where he's dressed up as a woman. So you see, there are numerous references of what we call men dressing up as women. And again, a lot of people say that they just don't want to do it as a disguise. And none of these gods here had the reason to hide, to run away from somewhere or put on a disguise. They did it because they probably wanted to feel free to express what we call their feminine side of their personality. We in this country, we have always said men can't cry, they shouldn't appear weak, they shouldn't appear soft. And men who dress in female clothing, but today feel that they can express their emotions far better. And I think that's exactly what these stories are telling us. Nobody looked down upon them. This temple is still active. Those miniature paintings are still revered. So there isn't anything wrong if somebody wants to express himself or herself in an alternate dressing. Let me move on to the other point that we're also going to talk about is about the same-sex relationships. There are numerous references in the Greek mythology, for example, and we won't get into all of them. We'll only take two references today. And this is the famous scene of Achilles and Patroclus, who were lovers. And when Patroclus dies, Achilles is so distraught. And this is a painting which brings out the pathos so beautifully. And it is believed that he was so upset that he went and avenged the death of his lover Patroclus by literally killing Hector. And knowing fully well that killing Hector would lead to Achilles' own death, he doesn't care. He literally kills Hector. And as you see in this particular painting, he drags Hector all around the battlefield just to, sort of avenge his lover's death. And this is something that we find in history later on when Alexander, does something very similar for his lover Hephaestion. So this is, again, same-sex relationships are, again, very, very common. We have these references, numerous, and I can go on. There's a beautiful story about Apollo and Hyacinthus. Very briefly, Apollo and Hyacinthus, they were lovers. Apollo was a god. Hyacinthus was a mortal. They were in love, and every day they would play. And one day they were playing discus. And unfortunately, when Hyacinthus went to catch the discus, it fell on his head and he bled to death. And it is believed that it's a place where his blood fell. These hyacinthus flowers have come up. As I said, there are numerous stories that we can go on from Greek mythology. There are a number of them from the biblical mythology. There were so many of them from Japanese, Egyptian. One can go on and on. There are numerous such stories in Hindu mythology, but I'm going to take a very, very different story from the Hindu mythology, and that is the birth of Bhagirath. The birth of Bhagirath is very, very interesting, and one of those rare stories that we find in quite a few mythologies. Rather, this is one of them. According to the Bengali Ramayana, which was written by Kritibas in the 15th century, King Dilip of Ayodhya, he died without leaving an heir. And, because he was so busy doing his penance to ensure that the river Ganges came up from the heavens to get salvation for his ancestors. So he really didn't have a time to have children. That means the throne was without an heir. And the two widows just didn't know what to do. They appealed to Lord Shiva and said that the throne needs an heir. Shiva is supposed to have told the two widows that they should make love. They should make love. The two of the women were quite surprised, saying, "How is that going to happen?" He said, "Just do it." The widows did as they were told, and a son was born. A son was born, however, without any bones. So, in the ancient text of Sushruta Samhita, it is mentioned that the father's contribution to a child is bones, and the mother's contribution is flesh and blood. And later on, by the blessings of a sage, this child got bones and he became Bhagirathi. And Bhagirath, which actually means born of two bhagas or two vulvas, is where you get the name Bhagirath. And of course, we know the story of Bhagirath as somebody who got the Ganges from the heavens on earth. What is important here is not just this story. The text, the one which I'm referring to, has a detailed lovemaking scene between the two queens, Chandra and Mala, with the description of the weather, the dark clouds, and the rain. Intense desire, and even kissing in a particular line, which goes on and explains how the two women dallied and made love. Now, here is a scene which, though expresses the fact that this is done for a need, but it doesn't miss out on the fact that this can be done out of passion. One of those rare stories from our ancient mythology. So I've spoken about cross-dressing, transvestism rather, and I've spoken about relationship, that is same-sex relationship, as we see in our mythology. And as I said, this is a subject that one can go on talking about. There are numerous stories I can simply go on, but that's not the objective. The objective is we take it forward from here. Celia talks about the present times. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Utkarsh. Amazing insights, stuff that I do not know about. So I am going to go back and read up on this. But pretty interesting to see that, equity and again, diversity of gender, sexes, of clothes, of being transvestite and so on and so forth, they have existed from all our times. And
True.
it's really sort of interesting to see as to when did they actually become taboo, so that is another point for another day. But let me come over to you, Celia, and your thoughts on the topic today, and what is it that you have to say to us and to the audience that's present here. Thank you, my dear friend. It's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Utkarsh. That was an amazing way to, segue into this day, which is a National Coming Out Day. And just before this call, I got a chance to hear from Zainab and Simran about their story. It was so amazing to hear that there are so many people, even in our Indian, I would say Indian continent, and especially within the Asian continent, where I thought that when I was coming out in the early 70s, that I was the only person. And I was so worried about my own life. And now I hear all these stories and they're amazing. Now, what makes it a taboo? Why is it a taboo? Why don't people want to talk about it? What's the problem with the whole culture understanding what we're going through? It's because there's a lot of shame attached to it. And when I remember there were a couple of times in my life I was trying to come out. This is a National Coming Out Day. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, for me, I believe that I was made this way. I was created this way. There are probably 23 pairs of chromosomes in my body that defines who I am, not just my outward experience or my outward, expression of who I am. I remember coming out to my mom that I wanted to be a girl when I was 4 years old while I was living in Chennai. And it didn't go very well. I went back into the closet because my mom said, "You're a boy and you cannot come out." And I saw the Hijra community at the time. And one of them, during a lot of things that happened. And I was thinking to myself that I am attracted to women, but I'm not attracted to men. But I'm attracted to women in a point where I want to be a woman. I want to be a girl at the time. And I didn't know how to, come out because I was a child. And there were different ways in which I wanted to come out, and I wanted to express myself. And growing up in a Christian household, it was really difficult for me to really express my femininity, because according to the Bible and the way it was written, or maybe interpreted in the wrong way, they said if you are dressing up in another opposite sex clothing, then it's a sin, because that's what it says in Deuteronomy. And the context was completely removed from why it was mentioned that way, because when you talk about cross-dressing or transvestism, I mean, it was actually called transvestism, and now it became a colloquial term. It's dressing in this, the clothing of an opposite gender is called cross-dressing. The funny thing is this, right? Women wear jeans today. Do you call it cross-dressing? I don't know. Men in India wear kurtas. Women wear chudidars. Is it cross-dressing? I don't know. That is not. So dressing is just an outward expression of what you feel inside, but it doesn't talk about the gender identity and the issues that you really have, what you're going through inside. And that's why the word cross-dressing, when I came out, I remember coming out and I told my wife, in 2004, that, sweetheart, I sometimes dress up in women's clothes, because I didn't know what to tell her. We were married and we were in US at the time, and I didn't know how to tell her. I didn't know the terminologies, and I used those wrong terminologies. I wanted to come out, but unfortunately she said, if you're dressing up in women's clothes, don't dress up. And I didn't know how to counteract that conversation. So I told her, I will try. I've been trying since I was 4 years old, and I could never, get rid of what I'm going through. So my femininity is, I couldn't express that. But now I know it's gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is so important, that because when you are in your birth gender and you want to express yourself in your preferred gender, which is my feminine side, I didn't know that was called gender dysphoria. And I was struggling with gender dysphoria since I was a child. I was suicidal. I used to harm myself. And there were times when I was publicly shamed in India when I was in my 9th grade, because of just walking outside in a skirt and a top and wearing a scarf on my head. I did go out, but I was just caught by a few people, and they were just, discriminating me. They were making all kinds of remarks. And this was in the early 70s, and I didn't know how to respond. And I was just standing there shivering. And I remember there was a man who was very close to my head, and he was coming really, really close to me. And I knew that day that I'm going to be beaten, or maybe tied up and taken to my dad, or I didn't know what was going on, what's going to happen to me. But why do people do that? Because they don't understand that they are also human beings, and they're going through issues that they are not able to express because the community is not ready for it. And these are basically because it's a taboo. I don't want to talk about it. I know you exist. I don't want to talk about it. I know these are portrayed in the movies and the television and the media, but I don't want to talk about it. Why? It's because I never had a chance to talk to my parents at all. My parents are gone now. And the only person that I could tell now is my daughter and my brother. I called him and I said, hey, this is me. And now they started accepting, because the more education and awareness, like what Utkarsh shared today, these are not something of taboos. These are not taboos. It's a lot of shame that we carry. And when we have people like you listening to these conversations, it helps us elevate all these stories to a point where it's not a taboo anymore. And these are stories that need to be told. Even in the Bible, when I started reading about eunuchs and I started reading about what exactly happened, I was actually enlightened that, oh my God, all my life I was just living in this dark world where I was almost ready to choke myself to death. That was in my 9th grade. I was explaining, and I somehow ran away from that place. But I can tell you, it wasn't easy. I came home and I wanted to commit suicide. I tied my hands behind my back. I put a plastic bag on my head and I choked myself. And I went to a point where it was all yellow in my head, and I knew that I was going to die, and I was afraid, actually. And I was gasping for my breath, and I said, and somehow I pulled my hands and I took the plastic bag out, I was actually afraid to live and I was also afraid to die. And that's not the situation we all want to be in because we are just misunderstood for lack of knowledge, for lack of understanding. This is science. What happens in our history is science, and there are people who are different. Gender fluidity is science. When you look at the spectrum, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. It's science. And I can go in detail about what happened in Johns Hopkins University. I've read a lot of research. I'm actually a biologist, and I've read a lot about human genome. And I worked on a human genome project in Indian Institute of Science as well. Now, why I'm telling you all these stories is I came out to my wife, and I remember when my daughter was 15 years old, she walked down the stairs and she looked at my mom and she looked at me and she looked at her mom and she looked at me and said, "Dad, why are you wearing a sari?" And I wasn't sure because I was wearing a suit at the time. We were going to a party, and I said, "Sweetheart, what do you mean?" She said, "Dad, I saw a picture of you in the computer. You're wearing a sari." And you know what happened? My wife just held my hand, saying that, "Don't, don't tell her, don't tell her," because it was a taboo. She didn't want my daughter to know. And I told my wife, "Sweetheart, I need to tell her. If I don't tell her, she's going to learn about me from the internet, which is a very marred, a bizarre way of learning about her dad, who's been struggling for 40 plus years with these kind of issues." Then my wife said, "Okay, it's up to you, but I just want you to know that, you know, I don't want my daughter to get a bad opinion about you." And I said, "That's fine. Let's." And I told my daughter, you know what happened? She accepted me in 25 minutes. Stops. She said, "Dad, I get it. I completely get it." And my wife took 17 years to accept me. Why? It's because she grew up in India. The mind is in India, while physically we are still in this country. I've been in this country for more than a couple of decades now in US, but I was born and brought up in India and I worked in India before I came here. And I faced so much of taboo. It's because of the shame that I was going through. I'm a senior executive in a company. I worked for 20 plus years in the corporate industry. I was doing global business development and I did a lot in my life, but I wasn't able to come out. And when I wanted to come out in my company, I had the taboo because people were like, "You're an executive, you're well settled in life. Why do you have to come out? Why do you have to come out? You have a wife and a beautiful daughter. Your life is all set. You have a beautiful house in LA. You're good. Why do you want to come out?" And I said, "You know what? If I don't come out, I cannot go on with my life like this. I need a purpose. I need a closure to who I am. I want to educate people in India. I want to educate people in this country because they have a taboo about who we are. If I don't do it, I don't know who's going to do it. And I know a lot of people are talking about it, but I need to come out." And when I came out in my community in 2015, uh, you know what people called me? "This is a man in a dress who needs medical help." And that was all over it came out in my local newspaper and they put my picture and people were just blasting me with emails and they said, "You're just a disgrace." And I saw the South Asian community also thinking, "Oh, you've come all over this place? And now I see a hijra right in my grocery store?" That's the way they were looking at me. And purposely, I used to wear a sari and go to the grocery store because I wanted people to know what I was ashamed of growing up. And I felt like my heart was going out. And I really wanted to come out, and I did come out in US. And I also went back to India. There are activists in India today, like we had Zainab and
Zainab and
Simran.
Simran.
And, a lot of people. I work with Kalki too. I work with Kalki and with Abhina, a lot of people, Rachna. And I saw that they were changing the face of India. It's really great. I really, really love that. And I was thinking,
So,
what can I do? How can I take these stories and help them?
so just hold on to that thought for a moment, Celia, because I'm going to come back to you. But I must go to Utkarsh now
Mhm.
to ask him, Utkarsh, from your point of view, from all these experiences around your work into the community and raising awareness about lots of issues, what are the taboos of modern times today? What do you think the people are sort of, shunning away from talking about? What are they brushing under the carpet? What do you think? And Celia, then I'm going to come to you with the same question. But let's hear out Utkarsh first. Over to you, Utkarsh. Thank you.
When I first did this session about 3 years back, surprisingly, I got a call from a local newspaper saying we want to interview you. Uh, Interview by a newspaper was a big thing in those days, and I was wondering what is it about. And the first thing the lady, and she said, so I said, normally, interviews happen in cafes and all. She said, no, I don't think cafe is a good place. And so she, along with the cameraman, they literally came home. And the first thing the lady asked me is, are you sure you want to do this session? So I said, why? He says, aren't you scared to do it? You're talking about scriptures. You're going to talk about mythology. You're going to talk about gods and goddesses. Don't you think you'll get into trouble? And honestly, let me be honest, for a second, I did get worried saying, oh, really? I had not thought of it this way, because for me, this was a subject which needed to be tackled. This was a subject which was which had to come out. I had to talk about it. So when we gave it a thought, my venue partner was agreeable to it. He said, let's do it. And you won't believe, we had a kind of a record turnout that day. And there were so many people. And thereafter, I have done this particular session at least 4-5 times, and all of them out of demand. And I remember that in one of the sessions, there was an old lady sitting in my audience. And I was wondering that generally these kind of sessions are attended by young people. And this one was a really old lady, like a grandmother. All through, she didn't ask me a question. Everybody was leaving. She walked up to me right till at the end and said, don't you think you should be doing these sessions in schools? And I was honestly surprised at her statement. I said, yeah, it should be done in the school. She says, there are so many children who feel bottled up. There are so many young people who are unable to tell their parents. I think you should do a session in school. And that day I told her, I said, get me a school. Get me a school who's willing to hear these stories. Get me a school who's willing to talk about it. But you see, the problem is, from what Celia just mentioned, that she did it her daughter accepted it in 25 minutes because she was in US, but her wife is unable to accept it because she was brought up here. Let's look at it this. This is such an irony that in India, our ancient myths and scriptures have such a rich and beautiful stories and messages and instances of everything that you can think of. We have aspects of the third gender, we have aspects of same-sex relationships, we have aspects of transvestism, cross-dressing, name it, and related to all well-known characters. We are not just talking about some obscure, deity. We are talking of mainstream gods and goddesses, right? And why is it that we have nicely or conveniently put it under the carpet? I think it's time to bring it out. Bring it out to prove a point that if you take some aspect of mythology to suit your purpose, right, you'll have to take every aspect of it. If you lend credence to some aspect of the epics and the myths, you might as well lend credence to the other aspects too, because if that's true, then so is this true. You can't be selective. My only concern here is you cannot be selective about something that suits you and something that doesn't suit you. I think it's time to accept it and simply move on and say, yes, it's part of our heritage. What are we ashamed about? If gods could do it, we could do it too. As simple as that.
Thank you very much for that, Utkarsh. And I see a couple of questions that have popped in, so I will take them up, Hema and Samidha. Please just hold on for a minute for those. I will definitely pull them up. But I'm coming to you, Celia, now. What are the taboos in American society as of now? I know it is, the most advanced nation of the country, but I'm also aware of the other side of the coin, wherein there are several taboos, and in some respects, from your talks and my conversations, it's even more regressive than India in some instances. So please tell us, what are the taboos that you see day in and day out in your American society right there? Thank you.
I think that one of the important aspect I see in India and a parallel to that what's happening in US is religion being used to discriminate people. I don't know much about, when you are, there's Hinduism in India, which is dominated, and the government is Hindu government. And in US, a lot of the concepts and the ideas are coming by the evangelical Christian community here. Now, when you're using religion to actually discriminate people, that becomes an issue. And I've seen that happening in US quite a bit, compared to what's happening in India. In India, what is happening is they like to kind of put you in a box. If you're transgender community, they want to put you in a box and they want to just keep you there because they don't want you to expand into areas where you can actually add value. And they have taken the value out of you. When they take the value out of a human being, then they make kind of devalue you and put you in a box and say, I love you as a hijra, please stay there, we love you. No, that is not what it is. Inclusion and integration means you have to get them into every part of your fragment of your government, even in the community. You cannot ostracize them. I remember coming out in India. I just want to quickly state this and then talk about US. In India, when I came out, the first thing that the waiter in a hotel, in a resort, I was sitting having coffee. The waiter told me that, ma'am, aap to bahut different lag rahe hai. That's what he said. And I told him I'm a hijra because I wanted him to understand that I'm a trans person. And the immediate response is, aap aisa mat boliye, no, you're not, aap to hijra nahi hai. That was the immediate reaction. I said, why? I am a hijra. And he said, no, aap to US mein hai, you have so much money, you are well educated, you don't look like you're a hijra. And I said, no, I did not come out. See, people who have come out and they are facing so many difficulties because they came out. I have not come out because I was scared and I was ashamed. I was worried. I wanted to kill myself, but they have come out and they have struggled all their lives. People who are struggling today too. They've been kicked out of the families and I didn't want to get kicked out. But I came out later in my life and my heart is going out to people. I want to educate our Indian society. So that is when he understood and he said, ma'am, I will try to be nice to the Hijra community in Uttar Pradesh because that's where he lived. Sorry, Odisha, that's where he lived. And I always think about the story because to me, if I take US, for instance, when I came out in US, it wasn't easy too. People call me faggots, all kinds of words. And I lived in the most conservative parts in this country where people just pass by and they always gave you a stare as to, who are you? What are you doing here? And why? Because there was a lot of conservative people who didn't like LGBTQ community. And if I look at the way, even within the LGBTQ community, the trans people were discriminated to the point where even in Supreme Court, when Obama had put the law for Section 1557, you cannot discriminate a trans person based on their gender identity. And the sex was already included in that. Suppose if you're LGB community, you will not be discriminated. So Obama added the gender identity as well. And then Trump tried to remove it because this is a very conservative government that you have. And they were backed by a lot of Christian evangelicals. I'm actually a Christian, and that's why I'm talking about all this, because I need to educate my community today. When they took it off, now what happened is he said, I'm going to make sure that we discriminate this community. That is going to cause a lot more problem for people like me when I'm coming out and I want to work my workplace as a Celia. And my employer can tell me that, Celia, you're trans and I don't want to hire you because I have now a backing from the Supreme Court. This doesn't happen in India. And again, I want to emphasize that 27 trans women of color were murdered last year. This year, the number has gone up to almost like 31 to 41. I don't know the stats, but it's way, way higher than last year. The reason is people don't like you. They don't like a trans person. You're probably dissimulating the fragment of what the belief system is. And when we use religion, when we use the mythology, when we talk about Krishna's life to explain about gender fluidity, what more can it be It's much more transparent and clear that, hey, this is not new. And I've heard people in US
Yeah.
tell me that, oh, I see a lot of people coming out who are gender non-binary, and I identify as gender non-binary. And when
Yeah.
you're coming out, and why? It's because, oh, it's a lifestyle. People like it. Caitlyn Jenner came out. Everyone wants to come out. I said, no, this is a 4,000-year-old culture. I gave a talk in one of the colleges, and I spoke to them about gender fluidity. I spoke about what Utkarsh shared a little bit before. We need change a lot. And I can talk a little bit more, but I want this conversation to be from your answer your questions and to see where we can take this to. How can we change the whole paradigm shift? That's what I'm focused on.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. And let me get to a couple of questions before we move on to my next section for you folks here. So here is Hema, and I think Utkarsh, this will be directed to you because this is there any historical time or people to whom we can attribute the sense of shame being associated with sexuality? Since obviously the mythologies show otherwise, where genders and sexuality were accepted and respected and valued. So essentially, when did the change happen from them becoming taboo? Is essentially what Hema wants to know. Utkarsh, over to you. Thank you.
That till we till Indians were not invaded by certain prudish countries and cultures, things were fine. I think it's the advent of the Britishers, I would say, who brought in their Victorian prudishness. And when they read this kind of scriptures, when they saw it on the temples, their Victorian sensibilities were scandalized, right? So I think that's when they thought that this is not civilization. And I think a meticulous killing of ideas and thoughts and expression probably started to the extent that the Indians probably themselves started feeling ashamed about these kind of things. What they couldn't undo was, of course, the temple sculptures, but definitely certain myths, certain stories were nicely overlooked and avoided. I think that's when it started off. And I think we've reached a stage where we ourselves don't want to talk about these kind of things. We ourselves don't want to discuss this. And we even today, there was a time when I was told, look, I think we should touch all the other cultures. Don't touch Hindu mythology specifically, right? He says, talk about all the other cultures. It's okay. Talk about Greek, talk about Egyptian, talk about Chinese, Japanese. It's okay. Don't talk about Indian mythology. And that's the stage I think we've reached. So instead of going ahead, I think right now we are really going, back.
Regressing, yeah.
I hope I've answered your question.
I'm sure you have, but I will take Celia's opinion and views also. Celia, from your experience of growing up and living in that conflict within yourself while you were here, what do you think? When did these things become taboo, in your opinion? Back to you.
I mean, as Utkarsh rightly said, it's the colonialism that really put these ideas in the minds of people. They were trying to put binaries as the way to define life. When they were trying to, they looked at our culture and they said, this is a complex culture. Aryan race and the civilization is so complex that we will try to institute some sort of a binary concept. And UK is now flying all pride flags, and they have Elton John, and they're happy right now. But they threw a lot of these things in India, and they said, you know what, you guys deal with it, but this is how we think you should be running your government. A very wrong way to kind of, I would say, completely dismantle the wonderful fluidity, the spectrum of genders we had within India. I feel so sad to say that most of the people who identified in this community had to go back. They had to hide, and they couldn't express themselves. And I remember too, Hijra girls, when I was traveling in train during my ninth grade or probably my 10th grade, I saw them being kicked out of the train. And my heart was just going out because everyone was so angry. One person was removing his footwear and showing to her that get out of the train next station. And my heart was just bursting with fear because I was thinking, if I come out, is this what is going to happen to me? Now, why is that fear? There is a lot of casteism in India. There's the racism in India. And unfortunately, with so much going on in this world, I have to say this. I'm a big supporter of the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matters movement. I've been working with a lot of my friends on the Black Lives Matters movement. I found that a lot of Asians, South Asians who live in this country don't have a clue about the 400 years of systemic racism and discrimination that they've been going through. Because as Indians, we are brought up in a race and culture, class and casteism that it's so difficult for us to, even if you Google and find out, you'll know that Indians are one of the most racist people on this planet. And I have to admit, that's the way we were brought up. If we want to change our future, that has to go. It's not about
Right.
binary.
Right. So I'll come to that in just a little bit because here is the next question, and I will come to you, Celia, for this. Our mythology does not show any shame about the same sex relationships. Where did it start to develop the shame attached to this subject? I think I will go to Utkarsh first and then come back to you, Celia, because this is specifically asking for quotes from the mythology. So I think that's the logical and most obvious thing to do. Utkarsh, my dear friend, it is over to you. There you go for Samida
Yeah, I think
Monday.
it's the same. It's the same thing, Samita. That as I said, our scriptures, our stories, they're not. They don't mention shame because it's very open. It's very clear. Their intention is to have a relationship, and it's very open out there. Question is, when did it start happening? I would say that when there wasn't anything of this nature, it was kind of meticulously ingrained in us. It was kind of forced talk about it, we should start thinking about it. So mythology has it. There's no shame, as I mentioned to you, that there are numerous examples in our mythologies. One can go on. As I said, this whole session, just the tales itself is a 1.5 hour session. So which means there are tons and tons of stories. But the fact that we don't want to talk about them, or we have given a very, very how should I put it, a spiritual explanation to what is something very, very base and passionate. We have gone and given it a very different, we are very creative as such. So a very, very creative and a spiritualistic explanation has been given to something that is very normal physical relationship.
Thank you for that, Utkarsh. And Celia, in your experience of religion, of Bible, and then of integration into the different religious communities back in the US and here in India, what do you think? What are your views on this? Over to you. Thank you.
I had a very interesting observation, especially when you talk about Indian culture. A lot of gender orientation, gender identity brought in, or they were used as a platform to also help the LG and B community. Because the transgender community were accepted much more easily than the LG and B community. It's because of the way in which we are, as an ethnicity. That's how we are. In US, it's the other way. You had the LG and B community actually help the T community to come out. And when the first Stonewall riots happened it happened in San Francisco, it happened in New York. Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, they were all fighting for it. So they were a part of the LG and B community fighting together. It was almost like there was a LG and B community provided them a platform. But even before going into this was all called as a queer concepts. They were more queer. They were like questioning, what is this? What's happening here? When Alan Turing, during the second, I think during the World War, came up with the fact he was one of the scientists who was able to decipher some of the secret codes that the Germans were. He was able to save a lot of lives. Even after he did save a lot of lives, just because he was gay, he was thrown into home custody, and he committed suicide. 41% of the people in LGBT community are committing suicide. Or the number is even more higher in trans community. You know why? It's because of the taboo. It's because of the taboo. We need to change this taboo. And that really, really has to happen. And when religion, and now what happened is I was always thinking that I'm a sinner. I read the Bible completely and I read it again and I read it again. The first thing that hit me was that's exactly not what Jesus preached. Jesus talked about two things. One is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength and mind. And then he talked about love your neighbor as yourself. The person can be Hindu, person can be Muslim, person can be Jewish, Latino, black, whatever ethnicity, whatever race, whatever color. You need to love them first like yourself. Not, he didn't say just love them, but loving them like yourself is the most difficult thing. And some of the, unfortunately, some of the evangelical Christians today take that part outside and say, no, this person is gay, I don't like them. Then I tell them, how do you love your neighbor who's actually a Hindu? You're okay with, having, you have office friends who are Hindus and you're okay with it. But when one person happens to be gay, immediately your antennas go up and you're like, oh, I don't associate with them. Why? You don't even want to go close to them because you think they're carrying a HIV around them. That's the way they look at trans people today. And that's such a big taboo. When I was coming out, it was very hard for people to even stand next to me. They were like, "Do you have HIV?" I'm like, "No, I'm married. Actually, I've been married for 23 years, and I'm still living with my wife and my daughter. I want you to know that this life, being trans, is not going to take away anything from my family. And everybody in this call, please understand that I'm a trans person, but I'm a father. I'm a husband to my wife. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a musician. I'm an artist. I'm a photographer. I am a hiker. And there's so much of elements and intersectionalities in me that defines me. I don't want you to look and say, oh, this is just a trans person. No, I have so many other attributes in me. And we all do as trans people. We are so creative. We carry those intersectionalities. On top of it, I'm a Christian. And that is why I'm trying to educate our own culture, our own community. As Hindus, we need to educate our own people. As Muslims, we need to help our own community as to why, this is what you show. And as Christians, we need to do. In Sikh, I have seen that happening. In Jainism, I've seen that happening. In
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism, I've seen that happening. So there is a lot of religious intersectionalities where we need to understand the fragment of what your religion says. Your religion is not for hate. Please understand, your religion, if you are following a religion that is teaching you to hate LGBTQ people, that's not a religion. That is something you have it in your head. A religion comes by relationship with the creator, with the maker. And that is why I redefined it. And I came to this point where I was able to understand that, oh my God, let me go and tell the Christians, dude, I'm a Christian, and don't tell me that I'm wrong. So I know, Utkarsh, you wanted to say something.
Right. Yeah. So hang on, Utkarsh. There you go. Yep. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, just what Celia was saying is just to add to that is I think it's not the religion which ever teaches anything negative. It is the interpreters of the religion who are busy teaching us a lot of negative things. All religion, whichever religion you look at it, never has anything negative. It's the way the champions of the religions go interpreting it for you and me, which has a problem. And unfortunately, people believe these people, and I think that's a problem. Yep. Back to you, Celia.
No, absolutely, Utkarsh. And I think with that, I'm back to me in the sense like, what is the way forward now? So, Utkarsh, I'm going to come to you first and then go to Celia. What is the way forward in terms of all these taboos? Should be there, should not be there? How should we be dealing with them? What to do, what not to do, and all the rest of it. In your views, Utkarsh, and then I will go to Celia. Thank you. All yours.
I'll go back to what I usually do, and no matter what happens, be it a calamity, be it good news, be it bad news, I look for references in mythology. And I personally feel that mythology has a lot of wisdom, not just stories. These are not just stories, these are huge amount of wisdom. And I think we should follow this wisdom. We should allow people the way they want to be, what they want to be. And I think it should start early. Instead of teaching children in school or educating them, I think we need to start at the parents. I think the parents will need to accept the fact that if their children have an alternative sexuality or alternative way of looking at life, let it be. there isn't anything harm. Unfortunately, what we do is, I remember a small instance in my childhood. One of my uncle's son was a left-handy, and he was advised by somebody that every time he uses his left hand, hit him on his left hand. You see, it's not good. Once you hit him often, he will start using his right hand. Now, this was nearly 40, 45 years back. At that point of time, if people thought that even being a left-handy is something negative, and over a period of time, I think we've accepted it, right? We don't even notice if somebody's writing with his left hand. I think a regular session, a regular update, a constant sessions of these kind, and more and more discussions will probably make people realize that their children aren't different. People in your organization aren't different. They are what they are, and we need to see them as individuals and not put them in brackets. Unfortunately, what happens is, we human beings love to put everybody in a bracket, like as Celia puts in, binaries. Either you're a boy or you're a girl. I don't understand anything else. I think it's time to say, no, if I don't understand, let me understand. Somebody please educate me. What is it that this child might be going through? What is it that this colleague of mine who seems to be a little different, instead of he being different, can I understand what the difference is all about? I think it needs to start with us. And this is the time. We are already late, but it's still not too late if somebody has still not accepted it. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you very much indeed. Very candid and honest, and practical points as to how we can actually do in our own little ways things. Lot of things about breaking these barriers, breaking the taboos. And with that, let me come to Celia. Celia, what is the way forward? How do we go, and what do we do in terms of breaking these barriers and breaking all the taboos? Over to you, Celia.
Yeah, thank you, Preeti. One important thing that I felt is first realizing that we need to make a change across the transgender and gender non-binary ecosystem. So when I mean ecosystem, what you need to do is, when a trans child is coming out, right? How do we help the trans person, trans child, especially when the person is in school? How do we help them with the gender neutral bathrooms? How do we help them to understand, have this as a part of the curriculum, so that they're not getting bullied in school? And then going to colleges, then going to workplace. How do we change the culture in the workplace, bring in diversity, inclusion, more of integration, I would say. Talking about diversity is not that, I would say it's easy to talk about diversity, but when you actually put the policies to include and integrate, that's when they have problems. So looking at it, and then going to housing part of it. How do we bring in changes during the housing policies in India, in US as well? The same problem occurs here. A lot of homelessness in LA as well. And then when you look at places of faith, suppose you want to come out in your own places of faith, you need to have these education to make sure that you are still going to the church where you used to worship, because you have that belief. And we don't want man to stand in between your relationship with God. That's what people are saying, that I'm going to be your gatekeeper. And that's where very wrong. And also the next part I would say is in the police system. We need to educate our police force. We need to educate our healthcare system. I've been working in healthcare for close to, I would say, 20 plus years. My professional background is in healthcare and life sciences. Now, when I see the healthcare policies, just last week I was talking to the Southern California Nurses Association, and I was talking to them, how do you treat a trans person when they come to your office, your clinic? How do you treat them? So that education and awareness is so important in the healthcare. And in India, I could say one thing: mental health is very poor in India. When a person says, I want to be a girl, my mom was a nurse, and I wish she understood a little bit of what I was telling her, because I was 4 years old. And when a boy says, I want to be a girl, they thought I was just playing. And it continued and continued and it continued. And I'm 51 years old now, and I have a 20-year-old daughter. And it still continues. So there is some pattern of what is happening and how do we change it? If I had mental health at the time, I might have even avoided a lot of the suicidal thoughts. What if I had committed suicide when I was a child? I wouldn't be even talking to you today. So mental health is important. And also think about areas in this country. We talk about immigration. If you're an immigrant, you're treated differently. And if you're a trans immigrant, it's very difficult. Legalities, especially with passport, travel, everything becomes complex. My license today says an X in it because I'm a gender non-binary. And I have changed policies in certain stores. I walked into stores and said, I want two IDs, one as Daniel, one as Celia. And they were like, ma'am, this cannot happen. We have never done it. I said, please do it. Be the change agent. And they did it. I changed it in Costco. I have an ID as Celia, I have an ID as Daniels. No person has ever tried it because as trans person, we want to confine to the binaries. We won't tell them, please give me an ID as a woman, they will give you. And give me as ID as a trans man, they will give you. But they will not give you a one ID, two IDs. Now we can change it. This has to change because there are people who are in the spectrum, right? A lot of them are in the spectrum. 27% of youth in California identify as gender non-binary. It's because they don't want to go with this patriarchy. They see too much of, so much of binaries that they believe the gender is a spectrum and they want to enjoy the spectrum and they want to be a part of the spectrum, just like me. And when you also think about when you're growing old as a trans person, how do you want to be buried? Because I've come across a lot of trans people when they were murdered and their bodies were laid in the coffin, they were laid as a man. And some of my trans friends have gone there and cried over the person because their entire life they have been living as a woman and the family chose to, bury them as a man. It is so heartbreaking to see this situation. Police force is one of the important things in US today. I've been pulled over by the police a lot of times and, but unfortunately, fortunately, I've not gone through any mishap. I just spoke to the police officer correctly. But a lot of trans people have been thrown into the trunk of the car. They've been beaten, and I escaped one such situation where I could have got raped in my car. It was really really bad, and there have been really situations in my life that I can't even describe in this call where I've
Mm-hmm.
gone through safety hazards. So one important thing that we can do is change the policymakers. We need to change policymakers in India, in this country as well. And when we write these policies, we need to keep a lot more people in mind: trans men, trans women, gender fluid people, gender neutral, queer, LGBTQ, people who are identified. I mean, not to the LG and B community because they are not doing it, they are not going through gender identity. But when you're going
Yeah.
through gender identity, you're literally changing the way you are that affects your legalities too. So policies need to be in line with that. And
Right.
so those are important things. So one last thing that I did was
Yeah.
also education. Keep on educating people. And so I constantly educated my wife. It took 17 years for her to understand her husband. That's not easy. So I now have a wonderful wife who is so loving and I told her I'm going to have this call and she's like, thumbs up. I hope you have a great time. And I never expected my wife would actually change. So to summarize this whole taboo tales, we can change. If my wife can change, who was born and brought up in different parts of India, and her dad was in the army, my dad was in the army. I lived in Chennai, and I lived in different parts of India, and I came here late in my professional, I mean, early in my professional career. But I think that when we have these conversations, like Utkarsh said, it's so important to change the parents, the baby boomers, and also the youngsters. I'm very hopeful the youngsters are the ones who are going to change this world. And I'm so happy to see my daughter standing next to me and saying, Dad, I got your back. And I have,
Lovely. Yeah. On that note, I mean, that is so encouraging, Celia, because I mean, something like that coming in from the future generation is actually very encouraging.
yeah,
I know these kind of conversations do not have like a proper end. We cannot give a solution to people who have tuned in today. But what I can say is that with continuous dialogue and conversation, we can bring about awareness. And if even one person starts thinking and removing those taboos for themselves, then I think we have achieved as a group between you, Utkarsh, and me of having this conversation right here today. So I just want to reiterate a point that, folks, my dear audience, this is not the end. This is rather beginning of these conversations. We are not here to provide you any solutions. We are here to tweak your thinking, your imagination, and give you with a lot of perspective in terms of a lot of other options that you can mold your thinking to. With that, this is time enough. We are up on an hour almost, reaching our 70th minute. Thank you very much for spending your evening with us. With Celia and Utkarsh, this is Preeti Chaudhary signing off from Diversity Dialogues for today. The conversations continue very soon again. Until then, please be safe and thank you very much. Thank you to Echo Events for streaming us. And thank you to Celia and Utkarsh for yet again coming out, talking to me, engaging in conversations, and bringing out so many important points. So, with that, this is all of us saying our goodbyes until next time to take care. Thank you.
Bye.